Picture someone who wants love just as deeply as you do. They imagine closeness. They imagine finally feeling peaceful with another person. They want to be chosen, valued, and genuinely understood. But when that love begins to feel real, something inside them responds as if they're facing danger. Their mind may become still, but beneath that silence, an alarm is going off. Their chest feels tight, their thoughts begin racing, and suddenly the need to create space becomes stronger than the desire to remain close. So if you've ever asked yourself why someone pulls away exactly when everything seems to be going well, keep listening, because this may completely change the way you understand their behavior. What if the distance was never really about not liking you? What if their silence wasn't a sign that they didn't care? What if stepping back wasn't proof of a lack of feelings, but a sign that emotional closeness becomes overwhelming before they even have time to understand what they're feeling? Here's the part almost no one sees. An avoidant person usually isn't escaping love itself. They're escaping the fear that love could take away their peace, their control, their independence, or even their identity. Once you understand that, their behavior starts to look very different. And when your understanding changes, the way you respond has to change too. You cannot make someone feel closer by chasing them harder. In fact, pressure can make them retreat even further. But there is another way, a way that allows them over time to feel safe enough to move closer, reach out on their own, and eventually take the lead without feeling trapped. And the surprising part is that it doesn't begin with the perfect words or some clever message. It begins beneath all of that. It begins in the body. It begins with felt safety. It begins with the quiet emotional atmosphere that exists between two people. Most people only judge what they can see. They notice what the avoidant person doesn't do. They don't text first. They don't share everything immediately. They don't show feelings in the way others expect. They hesitate when a relationship starts becoming deeper, even when it's clear that someone is trying to create something meaningful with them. From the outside, this can seem cold, selfish, confusing, or even careless. People quickly decide that they must be detached or simply not interested enough, but that explanation is often far too simple. What looks like rejection can sometimes be self-protection. What appears to be emotional distance can actually be a nervous system trying not to become overwhelmed. An avoidant person is not always avoiding you personally. Often they're trying to avoid the feeling of being emotionally exposed before they feel prepared or secure enough to handle it. And that difference matters more than most people realize. Every human being has a natural need for connection, even guarded people, even quiet people, even the ones who seem almost impossible to understand. The desire to bond is deeply human, but so is the desire to protect yourself. And when those two powerful instincts begin pulling in opposite directions, that's where the real struggle begins. Protection usually takes over first. That's why intimacy can feel so complicated for someone with avoidant tendencies. Closeness may not immediately feel warm or comforting. Instead, it can feel risky, like they're losing control or like another demand is about to appear. So instead of only asking why they won't make the first move, ask a deeper question. What does closeness actually feel like inside their body? If intimacy is being experienced as danger, then pulling away will naturally feel like relief. And as long as distance continues to bring relief, they'll keep returning to it until the connection itself begins to feel truly safe. This is the part almost everyone overlooks. People talk about honesty, effort, messages, commitment, affection, and visible actions. But underneath all of that, the avoidant nervous system is asking something much more basic before it can fully respond. Am I really safe here? Not safe in a logical way. Not safe simply because someone says, you can trust me. Safe in a physical, felt sense. Safe in the tone of the conversation, the pace of the relationship, the emotional energy, and the overall atmosphere between two people. Without that deeper sense of safety, the walls often stay up. Someone can honestly want love and still shut down when it gets too close. They can think about you and still ignore a message. They can care about you and still disappear for a while. It seems contradictory and it can be painful, but that contradiction can be real. Imagine trying to grow a delicate plant in solid concrete. No matter how strong the seed is, it cannot properly take root there. It needs softer ground. For someone with avoidant patterns, emotional softness can mean no hidden pressure, no sudden emotional attack, and no expectation that they must instantly prove how much they care. It means they can breathe within the relationship. It means being close to you doesn't feel like stepping into a trap, and this type of safety is rarely created through dramatic declarations. It doesn't come from explaining your love louder or trying to convince them harder. It develops quietly through consistency, calmness, patience, and emotional steadiness. It grows when every period of silence isn't treated like an emergency, when every interaction doesn't have to be controlled, and when the other person remains grounded instead of reacting to every change. That's when something inside them can slowly begin to relax. Not because someone argued them into feeling safe, but because their nervous system starts learning that maybe closeness doesn't have to become dangerous this time. And that tiny internal shift can become the beginning of something much bigger. Now, here's where things often go wrong. Pressure almost always creates the opposite result. Many people assume the answer is to chase harder, explain more, ask again and again, confront them repeatedly, or demand an immediate answer until they finally provide the clarity they want. But with someone who has strong avoidant patterns, that approach can activate the exact fear that is already keeping them distant. The more trapped they feel, the farther away they may move. The more emotionally cornered they become, the stronger their protective response can get. They become quiet. Their answers become unclear. They ask for more space. Then the other person becomes anxious, pushes harder, and the cycle becomes even stronger. Pay attention to this because it changes everything. An avoidant person rarely becomes more open because they feel pressured into it. They are more likely to move closer when closeness begins to feel like a choice rather than an obligation. Let that idea settle for a moment. Real connection needs room to be chosen, not forced. And sometimes, when you stop trying to pull someone toward you, that is exactly when they finally feel enough freedom to turn back toward you by themselves. That's the strange paradox at the center of this pattern. Their need for independence isn't always arrogance or a lack of care. Often it can be a protective strategy that has been built over many years. Sometimes those patterns begin early in life. Sometimes they're strengthened by past relationships where closeness came with criticism, shame, guilt, unpredictability, or constant demands. Over time, their mind can begin connecting freedom with safety and distance with control. But when you create a connection where they can move at a natural human pace, where they don't feel emotionally chased, something new can begin to happen. They may slowly discover that closeness and freedom don't have to be enemies. They can exist together. And once that realization begins taking root, you'll often notice small changes. A message they send without being prompted, a suggestion to meet, a warmer tone, a simple question about your day, a brief moment of genuine honesty that they normally would have avoided. These moments may look tiny from your side, but to them, they can represent a huge internal step. And here's another piece people often miss. This transformation isn't only emotional. It's physical as well. It involves the way the nervous system learns and responds. Many people with avoidant patterns learned early that emotional closeness wasn't always dependable. Maybe affection came with conditions. Maybe opening up resulted in embarrassment. Maybe asking for comfort led to disappointment. Maybe showing vulnerability created consequences they didn't know how to handle. Over time, the body remembers those experiences even when the conscious mind doesn't think about them every day. So when someone gets close, the reaction may happen before they can even explain it. Their body says, be careful. Their mind says, I need space. And they may pull away before they fully understand why. But when repeated experiences show them that closeness can exist without pressure, punishment, control, or emotional chaos, the system can gradually learn something new. It can learn that being connected doesn't automatically mean losing yourself. It can learn that depending on someone for a moment doesn't mean becoming powerless. And that is where the real shift begins. Not when you finally find the perfect sentence, but when the relationship starts giving their nervous system a completely different experience of closeness. Maybe their home life was so unpredictable that the only way they could feel stable was by becoming completely self reliant. So they taught themselves to handle emotions by turning inward. Distance became their method of calming themselves. Space became the place where they could finally breathe, settle down, and feel in control again. That kind of wiring doesn't disappear simply because they meet someone who truly cares about them. It takes time, repetition, patience, and enough steady experiences for their mind to slowly change the old meaning it gave to intimacy. This is exactly why intensity and emotional drama rarely repair avoidant behavior. Calm can, predictability can, a steady emotional presence can. When the brain begins connecting closeness with peace instead of chaos, something starts changing naturally. The avoidant person doesn't reach out only because they're lonely or feeling guilty anymore. They begin reaching out because the connection itself starts feeling comfortable, safe, and easy to exist inside. Their body stops reacting to intimacy like a major emergency. They begin trying new behaviors in tiny steps. They share a little more, they stay a little longer, they respond a little sooner. They think about you without immediately feeling overwhelmed by the thought. And yes, this process can take time, but slow doesn't mean fake. Slow doesn't mean they don't care. Sometimes slow simply means a deep fear is being changed one small experience at a time. Try to rush that process, and you can easily reopen the very wound you're hoping to heal. Respect the pace, and you create the kind of environment where genuine change can happen. Not because you forced it, but because they're becoming ready from within. And that's where their own initiative begins. So if you're building something with someone who has avoidant tendencies, pause before asking why they're not moving towards you quickly enough. Ask a different question. Does their nervous system actually feel safe around me? Do they feel emotionally free when they're with me, or do they feel watched and judged? Do they feel accepted, or do they feel managed? Does my presence bring them calm, or does it carry a quiet pressure they can't explain? Because without that deeper sense of safety, no strategy will create lasting closeness. Avoidant people usually don't respond well to force. They respond to peace. They respond to emotional space that doesn't punish them for needing it. And when peace becomes the quiet foundation of the connection, movement can begin naturally. Their distance starts looking different too. You stop seeing every pause as rejection. You stop assuming every withdrawal means the relationship is over. Sometimes something simply became too intense. Something moved too quickly. Something inside them became overloaded before they could process it. Their need for space isn't always meant as punishment. Sometimes it's recovery. Sometimes their body is simply saying, I need a moment to breathe before I completely shut down. That one change in perspective can completely alter how you respond. Instead of chasing their distance because you're afraid of losing them, you learn to meet it with steadiness. That doesn't mean ignoring your own needs. It doesn't mean accepting crumbs, endless confusion, or unhealthy treatment forever. It means you stop reacting from panic. You stop turning every moment of space into an investigation. You choose stability instead of chasing them down. And strangely enough, that grounded energy can be exactly what helps them return with greater openness, more honesty, and more willingness than they showed before. Stay with this part, because this is where the pattern becomes much easier to understand. When an avoidant person pulls away, the truth underneath their behavior is often much simpler than people think. They're not necessarily saying, I don't care about you. Sometimes what they're communicating internally is, this feels like too much for me right now. Their independence can function like emotional oxygen. When they feel crowded, pressured, or overwhelmed, their body can interpret it almost like suffocation. So they step back to regain their balance. They need to feel like themselves again. The painful part is that the other person often experiences that retreat as abandonment and reacts with even more urgency. They send more messages. They demand answers. They push for reassurance. And that extra pressure can make the avoidant person retreat even further, tightening the cycle on both sides. This is why space, even when it hurts, can sometimes become the very thing that allows movement to return. When space is answered with anger, guilt, accusations, or emotional overload, it becomes a battlefield. But when space is met with calm understanding, something different can happen. The wall can slowly become a bridge. Listen carefully here because this distinction matters. Giving someone space is not the same as emotionally disappearing. It isn't coldness. It isn't a game. It isn't a trick designed to make them chase you. It simply means remaining present without crowding them. It means being available without becoming intrusive. It means allowing the emotional temperature to settle enough for something genuine to breathe again. In that kind of environment, the avoidant person can begin sensing that being close to you doesn't require them to lose themselves, and that can touch one of their deepest fears. They begin learning that love doesn't automatically have to mean pressure, control, or chaos. Love can also contain freedom. It can contain silence. It can contain breathing room. It can allow time to think. And that changes the entire experience because people naturally move toward what feels safe and freely chosen. We are drawn toward what welcomes us rather than what grabs hold of us. Once an avoidant person starts sensing that closeness with you won't take away their peace, their desire can begin waking up in a completely different way. At that point, initiative isn't something you're constantly asking for. It becomes something they begin offering willingly. And you'll usually notice this change through the smallest things first, which is why people often miss it. They're waiting for a huge confession, a dramatic emotional breakthrough, or some perfect cinematic moment. But growth in an avoidant person often appears quietly. It's an unexpected message. A check-in that feels more personal than usual. A conversation that lasts a little longer than normal. A softer tone. A moment when they actually explain what's happening inside instead of disappearing into silence. A suggestion to meet that comes from them without being pushed. These details aren't meaningless. They're signals. They can show that their system is beginning to trust the connection a little more. They can show that safety is slowly taking root. And when that safety begins growing, even distance starts to carry a different meaning. In the beginning, space may serve one purpose only: escape, getting away, calming down, recovering, creating enough distance to feel like themselves again. But over time, if the connection remains calm and emotionally safe, that same space can become something very different. It can become room to miss you, room to think about you without feeling trapped, room to recognize what they actually feel instead of immediately running from it. And this is where the story can begin changing in a way most people never expect. The person who once needed distance simply to survive emotional closeness may eventually begin using that distance to understand why they want to come closer. That's a very different kind of space. And if you've been waiting for the moment when they finally begin choosing connection for themselves, this is the shift you need to understand. But with time, when the connection remains emotionally stable, space stops being only an escape route. It becomes reflection. It becomes a quiet place where they can think more clearly, understand what they're feeling, and return with greater awareness. This can be one of the biggest turning points in the entire pattern. They're no longer using distance only to run from the relationship. They're slowly learning how to use space to protect the relationship from becoming too overwhelming. And that difference is extremely important. It means they aren't necessarily trying to shut you out. They may be learning how to remain connected without becoming emotionally overloaded by the closeness itself. Relationships involving avoidant patterns often move in waves instead of following a straight path. They move closer, then pull away, then gradually return again, much like the movement of a tide. If you panic every time the water pulls back, you create more fear for both people. But when you understand the rhythm, you stop trying to hold the ocean completely still. And the less pressured they feel, the more naturally and honestly they may return. So the next time that familiar discomfort rises inside you when they become distant, try responding differently. Pause. Breathe before you react. Allow the silence to exist for a little while without immediately filling it with fear. Don't rush to close every emotional gap. Don't let anxiety become louder than your deeper sense of judgment. In many situations, their nervous system may not be ending the connection at all. It may simply be resetting. It may be trying to restore inner balance so that closeness can feel possible again. What feels like rejection in that exact moment may actually be the space they need before they can return in a healthier way. And if you can remain grounded during that space, you can become something deeply meaningful to them, a steady point, someone their nervous system gradually learns it can trust. Now, stay with this idea because it changes the entire picture. This is the paradox at the center of everything. When you stop chasing, you stop adding fuel to their fear. When you stop forcing closeness, you can actually make genuine closeness easier. When you stop treating every silence like the final ending, you give their own emotions room to rise naturally instead of forcing those feelings under pressure. And when that happens, they may begin moving closer. Not because you pushed them, not because you made them feel guilty, but because something inside them genuinely wants to reconnect. That kind of movement means more. It carries intention. It carries sincerity. It shows that the choice is coming from inside them rather than being created by pressure from outside. And that's the kind of connection that can actually grow. In the end, it usually isn't distance itself that destroys a relationship. It's fear. Fear can close the heart. Fear can twist the meaning of someone's silence. Fear can make two people feel incredibly far apart, even when they're sitting right beside each other. And over time, what softens that fear is not control. It's safety combined with freedom. When those two things exist together, a relationship can become strong enough to hold genuine intimacy without making either person feel trapped or erased. This is where emotional neutrality becomes incredibly powerful, and it's also where many people misunderstand the idea. When people hear the word neutrality, they may imagine someone cold, distant, dry, or emotionally disconnected. But real neutrality isn't any of those things. It's emotional stability. It's the ability to stay grounded when the emotional atmosphere around you becomes intense. It's being warm without becoming chaotic. It's having real feelings without allowing those feelings to control every sentence, every message, and every reaction. For someone with avoidant tendencies, that kind of emotional balance can feel surprisingly calming. Their nervous system may detect pressure extremely quickly, often much faster than other people realize. They notice changes in your tone. They notice urgency. They notice tense facial expressions, repeated questions, emotional heaviness, and expectations that haven't even been spoken out loud. Their body can register these signals almost instantly because somewhere in their history, emotional intensity may have become connected with conflict, criticism, shame, disappointment, or feeling overwhelmed. So even small signs can activate their protective response: a raised voice, a tense atmosphere, repeated requests for reassurance, demands for immediate answers. All of these things can begin feeling unsafe. And once their body senses danger, withdrawing can once again feel like the safest option. This is exactly why neutrality isn't weakness. It's actually a very intelligent form of emotional regulation. Without needing to explain much, it communicates to their nervous system: you don't have to protect yourself from me. When you meet their withdrawal with calm instead of panic, you communicate something much stronger than a long emotional speech could ever communicate. Your presence says, "I'm not here to take away your peace." That message can reduce their need to defend themselves. It lowers the emotional volume. And when the emotional volume becomes quieter, they can finally hear their own desire for connection more clearly. Most people naturally become urgent when they feel an avoidant partner pulling away. They want reassurance. They ask what happened. They send another message. They try to repair the emotional distance immediately. That reaction is completely understandable. When someone matters to you, silence can feel frightening. But for someone with avoidant tendencies, urgency can easily feel like pressure, and pressure can feel like losing control. And once they feel that control slipping away, their instinct may be to create even more distance. This is where the cycle can become difficult. One person feels abandoned and reaches forward. The other person feels pressured and moves backward. The first person becomes more anxious and reaches even harder. The second person feels even more trapped and retreats further. Neither person necessarily wants the distance, but both are reacting to fear in completely different ways. And if you can recognize that cycle before it takes over, you can respond differently. You don't have to chase every silence. You don't have to solve every uncomfortable moment immediately. You can allow a little breathing room while still respecting your own boundaries. because calm does not mean you don't care. Space does not automatically mean rejection. And emotional steadiness does not mean becoming emotionless. It means learning how to hold your feelings without letting fear take the steering wheel. That is the difference between reacting to distance and responding to it with awareness. And once that difference becomes clear, the entire dynamic can begin to change.